Hello, welcome to this, and this is going to be a video translation of something I've done on my text blog a couple times. It's character creation in the Gorgon Archer, and what I do here is I look at the character creation methods of different tabletop role-playing games, and with the eye of making a Gorgon Archer. The reasoning behind this, well, first of all, for a long time, Gorgon Archer was my go-to. I've never actually got sat down and played one in any game yet. Or I think I may have played a Gorgon once. As much as I like making the character, I've never actually gotten to play it. But the idea is this. Gorgon's going to involve a little bit of supernatural abilities, the gazes, the other such things. Archer's going to implies a fair amount of martial capability. And the more martial capability you get, the more complex it gets in most games, whereas even a little bit of magic is fairly complex. Plus, a Gorgon is something you're not going to run across just anywhere. It is not going to be a standard character design choice in most role-playing games. It is going to be something you're going to have to work around to get. That makes it a fairly decent way to test the flexibility of a character creation system. And so that's that. Okay, and for the first video, and yeah, I'll work on this a little bit. Right now I'm just using the photo display thing. This way, I don't know the timing so much on my things, and I like to give myself on these kind of opinion things, instead of scripting it out, I like to give myself room to have ideas, though I know I tangent really easily, so it's probably a bad idea in the long run. But anyway, so the first thing, since Gorgon is a thing of Greek mythology, and we're talking, and it's out, and it's one of my favorite games, we're going to go to Scion 2E, Scion 2nd Edition. This is the cover art for the Origin book, which has a lot of the base gameplay rules for Scion, and it also has the rules for making characters that haven't yet gained legend and really leaned into their supernatural natures. This isn't to say they don't have supernatural powers. There are Origin level powers you can have access to that bend space and time. I've played a character that does this. It is hilarious and wonderful and fun, especially when you roll high and get to spend a lot of successes on the different abilities you can do. Anyway, so Scion is the second edition of a White Wolf game. This is by Onyx Path, by the way, and it is the second edition version of a first edition of a game called Scion itself by White Wolf. And Scion first edition was Scion first edition was. I had a lot of fun with it. I ran it for 5 years with my brother and a friend, but it was a mess, quite literally. And the immense amount of improvement the second edition has is mind-boggling. It's like first edition, I love mythology, so I was playing it basically. But first edition was a mess of a system, not very well balanced. Sometimes they had mechanics mess-ups. But second edition is one of the better game systems I've seen in the last couple of years. It is really good. We were waiting for it for years and following its development, and it is really fun. Anyway, I am going to be using audio from tabletopaudio.com. It is a great site. Has lots of mood music, tons of stuff freely available that you can use as long as you attribute them and don't do it for anything money making. And I don't make money, so okay. The track I'm choosing to use for this, since Scion is a modern setting, is noir procedural. Since I made two companions for her. We're not going to get into them too much. I'm going to show them to the end. But I made a character who's very much on the downside of life is sort of the outcast on the edges of society, and we'll see that in a little bit. So I kind of got that kind of vigilante appeal thing going on, so I went with noir procedural for the music. Okay, moving on. So let's talk about Scion's setting. Scion's set in modern day Earth, where all myths are true, especially the contradictory ones. I'm going to talk about the default setting and some of my preferred settings, and there are 4 main dials. Genre kind of, are you going to be more focused on investigation, or do you want a lot of action? Do you want a mix between? That would be where genre comes in. Theocentrism is, which set of mythology do you want to be the focus of your setting? Do you want a one correct mythology and all the others are derivations of that, fit within that? Or do you want it where all myths are equally true, even if they don't make sense being all true? And then Titanomachy is, how much do you want to focus on the war between the gods and the titans? And the last one is evidence, and that's how obvious is the existence of the divine to the everyday person. Now by default, and I mostly go with the default, there's only one place I disagree. Oh yeah, the levels. These are, iron is closest to our reality as far as we know it, and gold is full out mythological, flexible reality from top to bottom. So the default genre is bronze, where you use all the rules as they are normal. It's a bit even mix between investigation and interaction and action, and I like to do that too, because you can see down here my preferred settings, it is also bronze. Theocentrism is by default gold. That is, everything is 100% true. The the Greek mythology is as valid as the Japanese mythology, as valid as the Christian mythology, as valid as so on. Everything is 100% true. I also prefer that, just because I like that. Anyway, Titanomachy. The default setting is silver, which is, their war is cold and on the verge of heating up again, but it's not full-out conflict. I prefer iron and heroic. To be perfectly honest, I'm not all that interested in having alien representations of the force of nature and incapable of understanding humanity as the villains, the main villains of my setting. I'm just not as interested in that. I much prefer to run it where the main villains are something closer to home, something more human, like the one I'm currently running. Redacted, because friends of mine watch this. But they're currently dealing with a company that is pretty much borrowed directly from Resident Evil. It's Umbrella Corps under another name. Anyway, evidence, silver and silver. So what that means is magic is, there's no masquerade. The supernatural, the divine is obvious. It shows up on the news. And however, most people are not going to run across it on the day-to-day life. Depends on where you are. It's like a tornado. We all know they exist, but most of us never see one. And those of us who have seen one, maybe you've only seen one once a long time ago and don't clearly remember it. Then again, there are people who live where tornadoes are very common and they might see one every year. So these are some pictures I gathered from the setting thing. You got everything from, this is like the silver type thing. You got the nymphstagrammers here with the nature spirits taking selfies at a store. You got interviewing the ghost about the murder, probably where they're the victim. You got the battle scenes, of course. And you've got this guy here getting people to calmly evacuate ahead of a horde of zombies. And this is the default setting. I kind of like to use it. There is one instance where one of these characters, I think is probably that guy, Eric, has a fight with a snake dragon thing in a park, and there is a picture of that, and I thought about using it, but I decided to spread it out a little bit. And he ends up, there's photos taken, all that. He ends up pretty getting all over the place online and such, with people making merchandising of his gear and things like that. It lasts for a couple of weeks, and he's just super embarrassed about, doesn't know how to handle it. It's great. Anyway, so that's the setting. You can turn it up or turn it down to make it more like, if you went all the way down to Iron, you're dealing more with like American Gods level stuff. If you turn it all the way up to Gold, you're dealing with some like that's getting into really extreme levels of supernatural stuff going on. If you bring everything up to Gold, you're talking about full-on war with the Titans. That's like Clash of the Titans all the time, 100% of the time. It's crazy. Anyway, so that's setting. So on to character creation. Let's see here. Part 1 is concept. This is where you come up with a narrative guiding concept and choosing your first 3 deeds. Deeds are important for advancement, and that'll come to that later. You can have you can have up to 3 short-term deeds active at a time, and 1 long-term deed and 1 band-term deed. For Esme, our Gorgon Archer here, the concept is Gorgon Archer, of course. The short-term deeds: stare down an enemy, face prejudice, have a friendly conversation. And the long-term deed, which might be one I'd have to talk to a GM about because it's very vague, or it's something that can be done in 1 instance. So it'd be it would have to be something that would be really impressive for it to match up to a long-term deed, but it's make an impossible shot. And the band term deed is resolve the haunting at Purity, Arizona. And this is pretty much all the concept session goes, is to give you an idea of what you want your character to be dealing with. And that's what I have. Also on the deeds, it can be something your character wants to do. It can be something you want your character to do. It can be something you want your character to do that they wouldn't want to do. They would avoid under other circumstances. Like, I'm fairly certain Esme here would probably try to avoid getting into a friendly conversation. At this point in her existence, she wouldn't want to deal with people if she didn't have to. Just because, social anxiety type thing. Face prejudice, she definitely wouldn't want to do that. It's something I would like to see her do. This is where you tell the GM what kind of story you want to have. And stare down an enemy, again, she probably wouldn't want to do it, but it's something she would expect to have to do. So that is step 1. Okay, so let's move on to step 2, paths. Paths are a little bit weird. They kind of are similar to aspects in Fate. In fact, a lot of the things in this system are drawn from things like Fate or Powered by the Apocalypse, from the looks of it. They gather together a lot of different mechanics and mix them together in a very neat and tidy whole. They did a really good job. For a character, there is no real limit to how many paths your character can have, and you will likely end up with more than 3 paths, just by the nature of getting things like guides or cults or other such things. But for character creation, only 3 paths matter, and paths represent a major story theme or story arc for your character, major thematic components to your character. And to be perfectly honest, trying to maintain a major function of a major story idea of your character, trying to maintain 6 major themes on 1 character is difficult, which is why the book says that while there's no upper limit, trying to go past 6 is probably going to be not effective. You're going to be leaving some that are just on paper and never show up in the book. So 3 is what you kind of your main focus for your central, and it's also the only things that affect character creation are the first 3, but you want to get you can end up getting more. And paths have some gameplay effect because you invoke them kind of like aspects. You get a once per session, a couple different once per session things. Like here, the once per session, you can call upon a connection related to one of your paths. If you do that more than once per session, you start stretching your thing. You start getting issues. For Esme, there are some example paths in the book. You can make up your own wholly. It's basically just a title and then 3 skills. I've set the skills off to be showing up in step 3, so we'll get to that later. But I went and took the suburbia path and called it the spooky kid growing up. And then I took the sneak path to get unnoticed and unseen. And to be honest, this path right here is the one that I focus on the least. It ended up. I didn't start out planning that way, but that's the way it ended up. Okay, for society path or pantheon path, you would usually pick which of the major pantheons you're connected with. But I decided I was going to make Esme not connected to any of the existing pantheons and just have her an independent scion. There are ways to do that. If you pick up there's a birthright that we'll get to later called Covenant that is in the Mysteries of the World companion book for Scion Hero and Origin, and that's how you do that. I called it the cracks of society and the universe, and I had to pretty much make this one up from the go because I wasn't drawing from one of the pantheon paths. The pantheons give you 2 asset skills and you choose a 3rd. But anyway, that is Esme's step 2. Okay, on to step 3, skills. These are the skills. They're very, what do you call it? They're very flexible. For example, you do not see stealth here. That's because you would describe how you're trying to stealth. And let's say you're trying to just stay out of sight or whatever. I might have you use subterfuge plus dexterity. Or if you're trying to just fit in with people, I might have you use culture and manipulation. Depends on what you do. For combat, athletics is connected to thrown items and archery. Close combat is anything melee, either unarmed or armed. Firearms is firearms. And at this point, the paths before, you would name them, one of them as primary, one of them as secondary, and one of them as tertiary. It doesn't apply past character. It doesn't mean anything past character creation. In character creation, primary path skills get 3 dots each to start. Secondary path skills get 2 dots. Tertiary path skills get 1 dot. And you redistribute any skill point that goes over 5. So any skill with 3 or higher gets a specialty in character creation. Once you get out of character creation by raw, you do not get a free one once you hit 3. I'm playing that way in my personal game, but that is a house rule. After character creation, you have to buy new specialties by raw. Anyway, read as written. Rules as written. So for Esme step 3, I put the primary as the spooky kid growing up, and Suburbia gave athletics, culture, and either empathy or technology, and I went with empathy. And so that was what it was. The cracks of society I made secondary. Society and the universe, culture, persuasion, and occult. And tertiary was unnoticed and unseen, so and that gave her athletics, subterfuge, and survival. Okay, that's another thing. You can use survival plus dexterity if you're trying to sneak through foliage or back alleys or other such things connected to, environment. Anyway, so for athletics, she has both the primary, And the tertiary, so 3 plus 1 equals 4, 4 dots. Culture, 3 plus 2 equals 5, 5 dots. Empathy, 3, right there. And then occult, 2, persuasion, 2, subterfuge, 1, survival, 1. And that ends up with what her skills are. And that is step 3. And for the specializations, I gave archery, marginalized, reading intention. Now, marginalized, she's good with marginalized cultures. That's a fairly broad thing. I wanted something more than just, you know, I could have done the disenfranchised as well. It might have been better, because I didn't want to just say the forgotten, because that's way too vague. But I kind of feel like she's the person that is trying to protect the people that fell between the cracks. And even though she doesn't like dealing with people herself. And that would include all the large communities. Well, that's just it. If they are in a community, they haven't they might still have fallen between the cracks because their community is not being protected by the society, but they're being protected in other means. So she would definitely get to that, but she would also cover things like the kid that's in an abusive family, but everybody thinks the family is so great and perfect, and they're wealthy, they're happy and all that, so how could something terrible be happening in that family? And that would seem to be later on down the line when talking demigod and god. She would be as much interested in that situation as with the other thing. Just in general, where society has failed a person is where she is interested. But this, more specifically, and because she hasn't gotten up to those metaphoric heights yet, would be more specifically about the minority cultures, the poor cultures, the ones that are not served by a lot of societal rules and such. So now, on to step 4. Step 4 is attributes. Okay, you have arenas, 3 of them: physical, mental, social, and you have approaches: force, finesse, and resilience. Force is the brute force application of that arena. Like for might is as much just going up and picking something up with raw strength as it is doing a full-on sprint through a straightaway with nothing fancy, just flat out run. That is as much might as lifting up a bunch of things or breaking down a wall. It is just the brute force application of your physical capability. Same with intellect. It's not doing anything particular. You're not going through the shortcuts. You're just processing information so bloody fast that nobody can keep up. That's the brute force intellect. Then presence is you are just such your confidence and your force of personality just overflows. It's just by dint of you being there, you saying firmly that you want something to go this way, that you get things, people listen to you. Finesse is where you bring in a little bit more skill. For like dexterity, you would start, instead of doing a full-out sprint for a chase, you would be doing things like parkour. For lifting, instead of just flat-out muscle, you would be looking for ways to lever it or get leverage or something like that. Cunning is working out formulas and shortcuts and ruling things out that you don't that you may or may not need to check. It's finding the quicker way, the more efficient way of thinking through a problem. Intellect is just raw processing power of going through it, all the different possibilities in a flash like that. Cunning is finding a more efficient way to look through things. And manipulation is instead of going on your sheer force of will, or force of personality, you are playing with their expectations. You are getting them to do the heavy lifting of convincing themselves. then stamina is physical resilience. Resolve is mental determination and willingness to move forward. And composure is keeping your emotions under control. As a note, there is no willpower in this system. So every attribute has one free dot. You would choose primary, secondary, and tertiary for the arenas, just like any other White Wolf or Onyx Path game. And the physical would get 6, the secondary would get 4, and the tertiary would get 2. And I'm putting them in order, and this is not the order I chose my physical, mentals. This is not the order I chose for Esme, which you'll see in a moment. But that sounds like it has less than a lot of other past White Wolf games and such like that. So, wait a minute. Aren't these supposed to be like on a scale higher or something? Well, for one thing, there is scale, but that's a gameplay thing. We're not going to have to deal with that much in character creation. But another, you have favorite approach. You choose one of these 3 to be your favorite approach. The one you choose, all the attributes in that row get +2 dots for free. So let's look at Esme. Okay, so for Esme, it got cut off and I forgot to correct it. I apologize. But her primary is her mental. Secondary is physical. Tertiary is social. You can see how I distributed those dots with the blue things here. So for social, 1, presence got 1, manipulation got 1. Mental, intellect got 1, cunning got 3, and resolve got 2. And for physical, might got 1, and dexterity got 3. And then for favorite approach, I chose resilience, which means these all got +2. That's what the red is. And my group likes to do the different colors here when we're doing it on a word processor, and that makes it easy to tell what dots came from what step in the character creation. And you designate the favorite approach as different purely because it is possible. I have not run across a reason to do so yet, but it is possible to spend 15 XP and move your favorite approach to somewhere else, and that would effectively move all these 3 dots, all these 6 dots to somewhere else. Anyway, let's go to part 5. So, part 5, callings and knacks. If we were creating a hero character, this would be expanded, but for origin characters you get 1 calling dot, and 1 knack. The number of active knacks you can have at a time is equal to your dots in a calling, because the calling dot represents a slot that you can put a knack in. So we only have 1 calling dot, so we can only have 1 knack active in a session. If we had 3 knacks, we would choose one of those knacks to be active in a session, and the other 2 you just couldn't use that session. The default way is you choose which one is active at the beginning of a session. But the way we normally play it, to make it easier, and this is a common thing, and it's not really, and it is something even the developers have suggested, is to just not state which knack you're going to be using until you need to use one. But once you use a knack, that's the knack you're using for the entire session. But again, most characters are only going to have 1 knack. Possibly. There's one more case where we can get more knacks. But we'll see. Okay. Esme Ross, step 5, I went with liminal. And let's go back real quickly here. You have creators, guardians, healers, hunter, judge, leader, lover, liminal, sage, trickster, and warrior. And for those who don't know, liminals are people on the boundaries of where you sit. They are visitors. They are not quite part of the society. They're on that border between one of us and not one of us. Nobody knows exactly where they stand. So that liminal confuses things. They stand on the line. They aren't. It's like if you were in a situation that thinks one of us or not one of us, a binary situation like that, like I already said. Liminal is on both sides. Liminal is Liminal's the type of person you ask, are you a guy or a girl, and they answer yes. That would be liminal. Because they okay. So for the knack, I took the neither the minute nor the hour, which is there is a far more hilarious knack in liminal. It's called Flatlander. But neither the minute nor the hour, it lets you make a prediction of doom or death. It doesn't have to be accurate, you just have to do it. And it causes the target to become flooded with fear. And that's what I chose for. And she right now only has the one knack. And she could, so it doesn't matter, she can only slot one because she only has one. Anyway, so let's move on to the next step. So let's see here. Step. Did I call it part in this instead of step? I did. Oh well. Step 6, finishing touches. Again, and we'll go over this later. If we were making a hero character, this would not be finishing touches would be step 9, not step 6. But here we go. Your defense, step 6, you do all the finishing touches. You have your defense, which is just your resilience stats. You have your health, which by default you get 4 levels with bruised, injured, maimed, and taken out. And then you have characters with stamina 3 and 4 get +1 bruised level, and characters with stamina 5 get another +1 bruised level. And as a note, when you take injury, you don't just take off a bruise thing. You actually describe the injury, because it will tell the GM will describe what to put down for your injury. That way the GM and you will know in what circumstances that injury penalty will affect you. For example, the bruised is -1, the injured is -2, and the maimed is -4 still, I think. If you get black eye as your bruised status, then it's probably not going to affect you running. A concussion on the injured status might, but or another thing you get with bruised is sick, feeling ill, like poisoned or something, and that might not affect your ability to talk to people, that kind of thing. Anyway, as a note, the average, most people you are going to encounter in the game setting have 1 health level. That's it. So heroes only having the 3 here, it's not that bad. Also, taken out does not mean killed. In fact, there is a gameplay rule that trivial opponents cannot kill Scion, cannot kill PCs. They can take them out, remove them from the scene, but they cannot kill them. Taken out just means that you are not doing anything this scene anymore. You have been removed from the scene. Maybe you got forced to run away. Maybe you got distracted to go chasing off after something. Maybe you got knocked unconscious. Maybe you actually did die. It depends on the circumstances, but it doesn't always mean death. The other thing you get from finishing touches is 5 skill points, 1 attribute point, and a choice of either 2 extra knacks or 4 birthright points. Now this is important a bit because birthrights are rules that appear in the hero book. So this is why you should get Origin and Hero together at once, because Origin will give you enough to play with, but it won't give you any of the rules on birthrights, so everybody will just be taking the extra knacks. And Hero won't give you the actual rule set, because it assumes you have Origin. So you kind of want both. Okay, here we go. So, birthrights. The last one, Sanctum, is for demigods only, so we're definitely not going to see it in this video. Creatures, they act independently, have a narrow range of specialties. The guide is a teacher or a mentor. It acts as a path and gives an extra stunt. It is, like I said, this will be, if you get a guide, you have at least a 4th path. Follower, mechanically function as equipment or gear. This is Actually, I have a character I made to companion with Esme later, so I'll show you how that works later. Relics are special items and gear. A cult is an organization that follows you and gives you access. It's not necessarily a cults cover all the different religious things. In the terms of Scion, the all the different religious the versions of the Christian religion are cults. And to be perfectly honest, I mean the original meaning of the word cult, that's correct. Cults are any organization that nominally revolves around one or more gods. It could be they just give, it could be like a law firm that just gives a passing nod to a Mercury statue every time they come into work, but that's still a cult. Their religion might not go anywhere past that, hey, Mercury, hi, and then going to work. But that's still a cult. So cults are an everyday part of life. They're not necessarily good, bad, or anything. Most people are part of a cult in this setting. Covenants is where you associate with a community. Instead of a pantheon, you represent that community. And the instead is wrong. You can be part of one of the pantheons and still have a covenant with a specific group. But it gives you benefits to dealing with that group, and they recognize you as someone that has made oaths and agreements to do them service in exchange for their help. So for Esme, her stamina and composure are 3, so if she uses those for defense, she rolls 3 dice, and her resolve is 5. Her bruise level, she's got a second bruise level because of her stamina. For skills, I added +2 to survival and gave the specialty urban. This is in debate right now. Some people say that the finishing touches points shouldn't give specialties, and some say do. It's not specifically said in the book. I went with the assumption that it does. So unlike what I said where in my game, if you experience your way up to 3, you get 1 free specialty, I do that as a homebrew thing, and that is specifically not the way it works in the rules as written. But this one is in a gray area that hasn't really been determined. Subterfuge, I gave her +1 in integrity, which is your resisting influence skill. I gave her 2. And for attributes, I maxed out her dexterity. And I decided to give her birthrights instead of knacks. I gave her a snake friend. And the way this works, each dot gives you 3 dice, so 6 dice. You can sacrifice dice to get a quality or a flair from the antagonist list. I gave Indigo sure-footed so that Indigo is not affected by difficult terrain, because Indigo is a snake. They slither around. They're not going to be worried about, rocks and such like that. They can just go around it. That costs 2.2 dice, however, so dice 4, and for their specialties, you generally choose between 2 and 3. I chose 3, and that's slithering, just general moving around, crushing, attacks, and hugs, which is comforting. So they are a nice snake friend who will crush your enemies and hug you when you need it. And I'm not sure how long Indigo is at this point. I'm thinking somewhere between 4 and 8 feet long. Relatively small constrictor. Defender of the Forgotten is their covenant, and they have 1, and that's with the marginalized people. At 1, you get enhancement with dealing with them, basically. Silver Austin is a guide. Eccentric archery coach. That their asset skill is athletics. So when Esme rolls athletics, they have access to this extra stunt, where they can spend extra successes. So the way stunts work is, you have a difficulty on a die roll, you're trying to get the difficulty number of successes. It's usually somewhere between 1 and 3. 3 is incredibly difficult. 4 and 5 is like supernaturally difficult. So a really difficult shot would be like a 2. 3 is something most people would never be able to accomplish. That kind of it would take a lot of effort for most people to accomplish. If you have more successes rolled than the number of difficulties you need, you can do 2 things. You can pump those successes into making the thing look that much more awesome. Or you can spend the successes on stunts, which are little bonus effects you can get. And there are a bunch of stunts that everybody has access to, but a guide gives you access to a stunt of their own. So as long as Esme's in good graces with Silver, they have access to this stunt, and when they do something athletic based, they might have a sudden burst of insight and be able to spend the successes that will they'll have a vision or something that will help them on investigation later. And that is that. Oh, since we got it now, enhancement are bonus successes, but they only add in if you roll at least one success. So let's say she used Witch's Insight to get a vision and added 2 enhancement. The next time she rolled investigation, if she got 1 success, those 2 would add in, it would make it 3. But if she got 0 successes, it is just 0 successes. It's a really good way to handle the it's a really good way to handle the amazing capability that the Scions and magical, supernatural, divine types have, without making die rolling useless the way it was in first edition. At a certain point in first edition, the die rolls became a formality. Yeah, anyway, that's step 6. So, on to the complete character, which I probably should have done before. We have her paths up here. We have her deeds over here. I just sort of put this together rather than using the character sheets. This is her skills. You'll notice I've added in the things I spend on finishing touches, same down here in attributes, and her health. These are her this is her calling, and these are her birthrights. There's a couple more things to callings that we'll deal with in a little bit, but not right now. I also want to point out that I have not given her snake hair yet. This is because at origin level, your character looks normal. The Ichor hasn't awoken yet. So if she is a Gorgon, she either hasn't been cursed to be a Gorgon yet, or else her Gorgon blood is in dormancy because she's not legendary enough yet. Once you get to... I could give her there are things you can do. You can choose to take a permanent condition, something that will never resolve. The health injuries here are a type of condition. They're basically ways to describe how your character is being affected by something. Usually they resolve somehow. While they are still existent, they give a penalty or produce an event that causes problems, and every time it causes problems, you get 1 momentum added to the pool. And momentum is a resource that can be used to get extra dice or to fuel some knacks. So, and you mostly get momentum when bad stuff happens to you. It's like you have these trials, you have this horrible stuff happening to you, and it's just you're building this momentum. You're surviving the trials, and then eventually you're just going to blow out and accomplish great things. Anyway, let's see. So this is another character I made to partner with it. It's a rebuild of an old character I made in Scion 1E. She is a Shin from basically the Chinese bureaucracy. And with her I went with Potemkin world as an idea. For the example origin, it doesn't really... The Potemkin world is you were raised in something that looked like a normal world, but it was like a fake one. It was designed to raise you to fit in with normal people. It doesn't really... It's not really what is going on here. It's just that I figure being raised by someone who was always sticking their nose into the occult, that the skills that came with that would fit better. I could have just made it up wholesale and just ignored that. That's another thing I could do. Over here I took medical practitioner, and I went with the Pantheon Shin right there. And I did not note what skills I assigned to them, which I probably should have. You can see the same thing here. I made her leader, perfect poise, because Acacia never tries to let her smile drop. She always wants to be very serenely, just put a pleasant smile on and just go with the flow on everything, not show any reaction too much. Be kind. And for her favorite, I put it in finesse. And you notice with her, I did something similar to what I did with Esme, where I didn't put any points in stamina and composure on Esme because I knew I was going to get these 2 points. Same thing here, except for I didn't put anything in cunning either. I just said I'm getting my points in that row from the favorite, and that's it. Acacia is also someone who has 2 followers. So the way a follower would work, you notice she doesn't have any fighting skill whatsoever. But she has a bodyguard. He's a heavy. That means he can fill in for her in physical things. He's also tough and savage. Off the top of my head, I don't remember what those... Tough gives him an extra health level, so he has 2 health levels instead of 1. Savage, I think, makes him roll 2 dice, extra dice when looking to do damage. So this is what would happen. If Acacia were to try to punch someone, she would probably roll might plus close combat and roll all of 1 die. But if Acacia were to decide to have Tien punch somebody for her, she could probably roll presence plus his follower rank, which would be 6 dice, except her leadership is 3. And since her leadership is higher than the follower rank, she would roll presence plus leadership, and that would be her attack at 7 dice. And since Tien is savage, it would probably be 9 dice, if I'm remembering the mechanic correctly. I can check that right away, actually. There you are. I should have done this before. Oh, enhancement 2. Okay, so it's not 2 dice, it's enhancement 2. If he rolls any success, he gets plus 2 successes. And this way, the characters here work sort of like equipment. By the same thing, Sally is a consultant, which means she works on mental things. There's a lot of stuff here that Acacia's pretty good with on mental. But Sally, so Sally isn't all that useful all the time with that, except for she's helpful, which means in things that are complex where you have to succeed a certain number of milestones and a limited number of rolls, she adds an extra roll. She makes it you have more chances to succeed. She also has terrible bureaucracy, which means she acts at scale. Scale is a thing that is used to represent the differences in size or strength of things. Like a human is scale 0 on speed, strength, all that, size, all that kind of thing. Also, most of the time, a person is scale 0 on leadership. I believe like the a national leader might have a scale 2 or 3. A recognized divine figure would have like a scale of 4 or 5 on leadership. Sally acts at scale 1 for doing anything involving bureaucracy. That means Sally's on her own is roughly equivalent to having a full office of people working at bureaucracy. So even though Acacia's no slouch on all of the mental stuff, on a lot of the mental stuff, Sally is, and she still has leadership 3. So if she uses Sally to get involved with politics or finance or anything like that, getting Sally to deal with it is probably better. Sally's probably better at it than Acacia is. Sally is a force to behold in an office. Anyway, This is another character. I made hers her favorite as force, and you've noticed I leaned into it a little bit more by adding points to the presence and the might, which that's the way you can do it. With Esme, I only put dots into the resolve, and the stamina and composure just got the favorite. In this case, might and presence both got dots, and then the favorite on top of that. So I really leaned into the favorite on this one. And this is a character who, well, I gave her 2 relics. And so a standard knife, a standard weapon has 3 points worth of tags by natural. A relic a dot in a relic can add 1 tag. And so a basic knife is concealable, lethal, melee, and thrown. That totals up to 3 points. Because I believe lethal and melee are 0. I can't remember what points they are. But anyway, that is that. And then for 1 point I added defensive. For the bayonet, concealable, lethal, melee, thrown, and then I added brutal and grappling, using both the points here. These birthrights also both have flaws, and they are giving her urges that she has to resist. So she is constantly being pushed to do violent things of different sorts by her knives. The marshal's knife is wanting to push her to constantly avenge wrongs. The bloody bayonet is constantly making her suspicious and paranoid that someone's out to get her. Her story is that her parents were Scions of Ares. I think one was born and one was chosen. I can't remember what I decided. And each of them had one of these knives. And they were killed. And now Skylar carries both knives. And I focused on Vigilante's daughter. Actually, they were both of her parents were vigilantes. The one was also a military officer. So anyway. So Skylar's problem is she's always having to resist the urging of the spirit of the violent spirits that are trapped in these knives, and she's basically the custodian of them. Anyway, I gave her warrior and closed the gap. I did not give her extra knacks. I probably should have done that just to show what it would be like, but anyway. So on to advancement. Okay, so advancement. Advancement is done primarily by experience points, but that is not the only way. For example, legend does not go up with experience point spends. You cannot spend experience to get legend. You cannot spend experience to get boons. You cannot spend experience to get calling dots. Those all happen when you gain a legend. And I'll talk about that in a moment. For experience, if you attend a session, 1 XP. If you choose a short-term deed, 1 XP. If you do two short-term deeds, you don't get another XP. It's that you get the short-term, get each of these awards once per session. So if you mark off, so you wouldn't mark off both short-term deeds. You say, yes, you did it, but you also did this other deed, so you're going to have to do that one again another time. But you're also allowed to tweak deeds off or not. It's like, I want to change out one of my short-term deeds at the end of every session. You're allowed to do that. My game, we've changed that a little bit. We switch out short-term deeds once everybody has completed a long-term deed. Long-term deeds. When you get it, you get 2 points. Also, if every player in the band completes a short-term deed in the same session, everybody gets a bonus 1. Long-term deeds, when you complete your long-term deed, you get 2 XP. You cannot do that again until everybody in the band has completed long-term once. So after Esme makes her impossible shot, let's go back a little bit. After Esme makes her impossible shot, she'll replace the long-term deed immediately, but she won't be able to fulfill it for XP. She'd be able to complete it, which would be bad luck if she did it the next session. But she would not be able to resolve a long-term deed for XP until Acacia convinced a skeptic and Skylar had an amazing fight. Until all three of those happened, you can't get a second long-term deed. And the players spend half the momentum pool in a single scene. That's the momentum thing again that I was talking about earlier. Then you get 1 XP to the entire group. If the characters reach a story milestone, that's 1 XP. And if the characters complete a group story, that is 3 XP. Important thing to note. That's a group story. That is not a band term deed. Those are different things. That is a mistake I constantly make in forgetting that those are separate. The band term deed does not go into experience. It does not affect experience at all. What it does affect is legend. Characters will go up in legend once they have completed 1 each of a short-term deed, a long-term deed, and a band term deed. Once they've completed 1 each of those, they go up in legend. So, and the first time when you go from legend 0 to legend 1, you get your visitation. When you go from, which gives all of this stuff, you get also the 2 boons in your first title. When you go from legend 1 to legend 2, you get another calling dot and another title. Legend 3, 3 boons now, and you start having omens and 3 titles. Omens are visual or auditory. There's some sort of obvious marker of when your character is using legendary power. Whenever you invest legend, whenever imbue legend is the term, excuse me. Imbue or spend legend, your omen will appear. It could be an auditory thing like static. It could be a visual thing like a aura. It could be a minor shapeshift like getting extra arms like you saw in one of the earlier pictures I posted. It doesn't really add into anything, but you can use it to add to describe your actions a little bit more, and maybe the GM will give you an enhancement. You will definitely get enhancement for dealing with people of the same pantheon as you. And then from Legend 3 onward, you have as many boons as you have in Legend. Anyway, so for the simulated XP gain for Esme going from Legend 0 to Legend 1, I assumed 3 short-term deeds, 1 long-term deed. Everybody completed the short-term deed in the same session once. Spent half the momentum pool 5 times, which I did 6 sessions. My group has not had trouble spending the momentum pool or filling it ever. We make lots of mistakes. We have lots. The dice are very happy to give us extra momentum. So, way you gain momentum. If you roll a failure, you gain 1 momentum. If you roll a failure on something that is your specialty, you gain 2 momentum. If you roll a botch, you gain 3 momentum. If you roll a botch on something that is your specialty, you gain 4 momentum. And that is hilarious when it happens. That is how you get a remote operated hovercraft shooting up a village you just want to warn off instead of cause actual problems. Group story completion once, story milestones twice, and sessions 6, so a total of 22 XP. For Esme, I spent that all in skills. I gave her 2 new specialties. I gave her subterfuge up to 3, and her integrity up to 3, and I maxed out her athletics. So this lets her, speak to authority figures without, tell the truth without telling the truth, without revealing anything, and resisting temptation, resisting bribes and stuff like that. Okay, visitation. More specific of what happens when you go from Legend 0 to Legend 1. Step 5, the callings is extended. You get 2 more callings for a total of 3, and you get 4 more calling dots. You also get a number of knacks to fill out those calling dots. These are the last free knacks you will get in the game. After this, you have to spend XP to get all your knacks. When your legend goes up and you get a calling dot, right here, let's see here, we get a calling dot here and here that does not come with a free knack. You have to spend XP to get knacks. Step 7 is purviews. You get 2 free purviews. One comes from your Pantheon, or in our case, the Covenant birthright for Esme. One purview comes from your specific patron, and since Esme does not have a patron, she just is going to pick one. Step 8 is boons, and you get 2 boons. You can also get patrons from your birthrights, so you can have a lot of purviews, but in reality you don't really need that many. Any purview when you have a purview, allows you to do things called marvels, which are very flexible, including the ability to duplicate the effects of boons from other purviews, as long as you explain it in a way that matches the purview you're using. But it costs more, and you get a limited number of boons, but all the boons for the most part are basically, this is a marvel that you have made more efficient. For the most part. There are some that are a little bit weird, but for the most part, boons are marvels that you've made better than they were. Okay. And then you have the final finishing touches, which is you have calling keywords, you have titles, you have virtues, and you start being able to fate bind. So for Esme Ross, Gorgon Archer, we have, let's see here, all the white is stuff. First, the callings. I gave her another dot in Liminal and Experienced Traveler. Then for Guardian, I gave her knacks, a purpose, and I had to specific what purpose was, and that is the Forgotten, and a Sentinel. And I'll do the keywords in a little bit. And for Hunter, I gave Hunter for her third calling, and 1 dot in it with the Silence in the Woods knack. You never get more than 3 callings. Caveat: guides can give you access to a 4th calling, or more if you have more than 1 guide. You still only have as many slots as you have calling dots, and the guide won't give you a calling dot. So like if I had Silver Austin here give a calling like Sage instead of a purview, and gave a knack, I would have to purchase the knacks connected to that calling, and I'd have to fill them in somewhere on one of these slots. It would be a little bit odd. Anyway, for birthrights, I added 2 points to Indigo. Indigo can now go use stealth very well, and has 8 dice, making them, they've probably got a lot bigger. Either that or stronger if they haven't got any bigger. They're still a very spooky snake. Not spooky because they don't have spooky powers, but they're a very powerful snake friend. They give great hugs. Silver Austin, I've expanded Silver's description from eccentric archery coach and witch, and I'll let you in on a thing here. My idea on this is that Silver is a cover identity for Hecate. I'm thinking Hecate, even though Esme isn't part of the Greek pantheon, I'm thinking Hecate is guiding this Gorgon. And Silver teaches Esme how to use the Purview of Fortune. That'll go away if she pisses off Silver. And for Cracks, I increased it by 1. So now she has access to the Covenant. She has access to the Covenant boons. So this is in essence becoming her Pantheon Purview. Even though because she doesn't have a Pantheon Purview, she has this Covenant though, so she has access to marvels through that. And then a relic, the Styx Flute. Relic 2 has the Passion, Hope, and its motive is a serpent song. So motifs. I should have made this I should have made this italics as well. Anyway, motifs are the manner in which you do magic. Every pantheon has a motif of their own. Since Esme does not have a pantheon, I created her own motif, which is discarded things have forgotten power, and that goes in with her being related to the marginalized and the disenfranchised and the forgotten. She is representative of that, and she's able to bring magic out of all the stuff that has been left on the borders and the cracks. That is, and the flute gives her another source of being able to do magic, and that is a serpent song. So Esme would probably have a small collection of what most people would think is garbage that she is able to do magic with. Anyway, and she can also use music through the flute. She can use music to do magic as well. For the Norse, they do knots and runes. The Greeks call upon the gods, and if you get powerful enough, that includes calling upon yourself. It's like, you know, Father Zeus, please aid me in this moment, and something magical happens. Or, I am Ares, I am the god of war, you do not face me, and something magical happens. The Orisha get magic out of mixing herbs. The Kami speak to the spirits in all things, the Kami in all things, which is a little bit interesting. The Shin do alchemy. The Netjer, I believe, do sacred words, if I remember correctly. I might be wrong on that. But everybody has their own, and every relic creates its own. Every relic that gives a purview, also it gives a motive. And for her, so she got fortune from silver, she got passion from the flute, she got covenant from covenant, and beast is her personal one that would come from a pantheon, I mean patron, but I'm not going to say she doesn't have a patron, because that's sort of what silver is, and one of Hecate's purviews is beasts, so I kind of cheated that out. Another thing you get is virtues. Virtues are two thematic things that a pantheon focuses on. For the Theoi, it would be kinship versus egotism, since they are very much about their own self-centered things, and also very much about family. And the Norse, it's fatalism versus audacity, and there is a sliding scale here. Note that a particular action can go with both sides of it. Since Esme is independent, I had to create her own virtues, and I decided for someone who's been forgotten, is in the cracks, that the two virtues that most made sense are anger and compassion, and fluctuating between those. So when you get all the way to one end or the other, you get certain benefits. But there are also a few downsides. It's not as bad as the virtue extremities that you ran across in Scion 1e, but it is analogous in a narrative. But fortunately, you no longer have the thing of you have to act unreasonable, and or else you go crazy, that you had in First E. It is very much more organic. It doesn't feel forced at all. Anyway. For boons, I took both of them as snake boons, animal aspect and leader of the pack. So she only has beast boons. That doesn't mean she can't do anything with the others. She can still perform marvels through fortune and passion. That, raising people's hope, or dealing with luck and destiny. She can still manipulate those. It's just she's much more efficient doing stuff with snakes. Anyway, that is... Ooh, I don't know how I did that. Anyway, that is the end. That is the end of my slides here. I'm going to give me a moment. Okay, one last thing I forgot, and then I'm going to do some wrap up. This thing here, the permanent conditions, snake hair. Esme has snakes for hair. They are hissy. This is a condition. There is no real mechanics to it because I basically borrowed directly from what do you call it? There are rules for playing a kitsune, and one of the things that one of the conditions that a kitsune has is a foxtail, and its complete description is you have a foxtail. It is fluffy. There is things here that if every time you go up in legend you get another tail. So a legend 9 kitsune would have 9 tails. But I basically did the same thing. I didn't want to have any particular mechanical or dice heft to it. I just wanted to be something that can cause problems. And that would have shown up as soon as she turned from Legend 0 to Legend 1. Her hair would have gone to snakes. I'm thinking because she's part Gorgon. One of her ancestors is a Gorgon. And that is just something you can volunteer to take. If you play a denizen, a lot of the denizens have built-in conditions that they take. They get more severe the higher in legend you go. And I assume this one would also get more severe as she gets higher in legend. More obvious. Maybe she'd get more obviously Gorgon-y or whatever. Anyway, it is very voluntary. It is very low impact. It means that right now she is very much just a nod at Gorgon. But I would also note that one of the marvels you can do is attack. She could, through Beast Snake, for example, spin the legend on a marvel that allows her to attack. And it could be like snake bites or whatever, or it could also be, in her case, the Gorgon's gaze. And she would have for the rest of the scene the ability to attack people by gazing at them and turning them to stone. And then her injury things would all be variations of people turning into stone instead of like cuts or poison or whatever. And that works. One of the boons I was going to take later was going to be a refluff of Heaven's Fire from the Fire purview, and this is perfectly encouraged, that you can take a boon from one purview and reflavor it and make it a boon in one of your own purviews. I was going to reflavor Heaven's Fire, which makes it cheaper to do an attack marvel basically, into Gorgon's Gaze for her later when she leveled up. I could have done it here, but I didn't want to. Anyway, so scrolling all the way back. Yeah, so Scion 2E, I really love this game. It is really fun to play with mythological things in a modern day setting. That's why I did Divine Blood. That's why I love Scion 1E as much as I did, even though it was a mess of a system for many reasons. Scion 2nd edition is just so... it is... that you can tell they did research into a number of different systems, and they pulled mechanics from a lot of different places and put them together in a very, very well-fitting way. It doesn't look... it's not a kludge. It is very fluid. It works together very well. And it's this really interesting blend of having solid crunchy mechanics and having the very narrative, flexible narrative thing that you have in Fate. Now granted, when I play Fate, I tend to add more crunch to it. You know, crunch by the means of discernible numbers-oriented rules. So it is already well in that area I like, where it has definite strong narrative aspects, but can be done in but has also a clear mechanical build to it. It's not rules light. It is definitely it is also, it's not completely, the narrative is the strongest aspect, but it's not the only aspect. There is just enough there's enough mechanics in there to have some some interesting boundaries set. And the way they did everything, I love the whole idea of this gives you a bonus, but only if you roll at least one success. That is very nice. And there's also like some of the different penalties that can happen is you can have increase the difficulty, which is, you know, you would roll, the difficulty would go up by 1, or maybe you would roll fewer dice on this or whatever. Or you have complications, which are, if you don't spend a number of successes to this complication, then this complication happens. You could succeed at what you're trying to do, but still suffer the complication because you didn't have enough successes to get rid of it. Or you could buy off the complication, but fail at what you were trying to do. It's really a really interesting way to do things. It's very flexible. It makes it to where you can do a lot of heft in and out without having huge dice pools. And the scale system also really works. They have a dynamic scale and they have narrative scale. One of them is for when you're dealing with trivial targets or just you're doing cutscene stuff, and the other one is for when there is a chance you'll win, but maybe not. And they avoid having the thing of having too much enhancement by saying that basically if there's a scale difference or a tier difference of 2 or more, that it's a little bit beyond you and that kind of thing. And I forgot to say what titles and keywords do. Okay. Last thing here. Okay, so these keywords represent things that particularly associate. There are suggested ones in the books, and you can make your own. Witch for liminal and serpent for hunter are ones I decided for myself. Protector, shelter, and outsider came from the suggested keywords. And at every legend, you choose one. You make yourself one title, which I forgot to type in on this thing. The first title for Esme Ross would be the Scaled Witch. You can spend legend to invoke your title so that you can act in scale. If the situation you're in right now fits within your title. So if she's doing something that fits within the title of the Scaled Witch, and she spent a legend, she would be acting at a higher scale than a single person. And the amount of scale it adds is equal to your legend, half your legend rounded up. So 1 divided by 2 rounded up goes to 1. She would be operating at scale 1. So instead of acting like a single person, she'd be acting like a small gang or a small giant or something like that. It's another way to add in some fun narrative flexibility that within the category, within things that apply to this particular title, you act more powerfully than you otherwise would. And you get 1 title on every legend. So by the time you hit legend 8, you have 8 titles. And you're acting at huge amounts of scale whenever you invoke one. But when you're not acting according to that title, you are acting on the level of a normal person. It's a very interesting way to do things. It avoids the thing you had in Scion 1E, where at a certain level, it became like the rules were there for formality, but you already had so many bonuses that why bother rolling? It became unwieldy. It would be almost impossible to make difficulties that would affect a person that had built to be specialty in that thing, while still making it not impossible for anybody else. The way they did this system, the person who is specialized in that might still fail, but when they succeed, they will succeed tremendously. It would be like anytime they have the slightest amount of success. They don't go small levels of success when you're good at something in Scion. When you get any success, you are doing it to an amazing level. But the person who isn't specialized still has a chance of pulling it off. It's just they're gonna squeak by. And it's it's really fun. They also tried very hard to deal with the cultures involved in all the different pantheons and actually talk to the people that were part of the different religions that were involved. And all of these, like, there are still people who worship the Greek gods. So these are all, some of them were lost for a while and reconstructed, but these are all active, real religions that they were thinking. We think of them as, oh, stuff from the past, but there are active people that follow these religions. Some of them, especially, there's tons of them. Like the Hinduism is a major religion. There's billions of people following the Hinduisms. Unfortunately, we're not likely to see the Abrahamic religions because they have been avoiding dealing with Islam, Christianity, and Judaism in the game. We see references to it all the time not all the time. There's small references all over the place, here and there in the books, that yes, Christianity is a thing, and yes, Christianity exists, and yes, it is the Christian mythos is as or the Abrahamic mythos. Let me do all three. I'm Christian, so I tend to lean more towards thinking about one. Apologies, but the Abrahamic mythologies, the collected Abrahamic mythologies, are just as true as the other ones. It's just the company doesn't want to deal with the mess, so they haven't, which, seems odd because some of these others are equally, some of these others have a lot more, also have a lot of baggage. There is an exception. So the Gaul pantheon in one of the, I think, the Mysteries of the World is mostly lost. I think the Tuatha that we have here from the Tuatha expert, it is mostly based off stories that were created by Irish monks to give to people to say, hey, this is what we converted. So those aren't as well known. I mean, there's still a heavy part of the society. There's still a heavy culture and everything, but I'm not an expert. I play games. There are a lot of experts on the 2E Discord channel, though, so I get trickles here and there. And I just really love the fact that they made the effort most of the time to be accurate to the culture. There have been, of course, some controversy, small and large, between the player base and the writers and some of the experts. But by and large, this is a very well done and, for the most part, very well researched game that that makes a playable game setting while mostly being accurate and respectful to the cultures. And I like that. Anyway, so that's Scion 2E. Talk to you later.